Now, a few days ago, I dropped a video about shooting in aperture priority and how I almost exclusively shoot in aperture priority. Now, there were some comments in that video that sparked me to want to make this follow-up video. Now, first things first, in that video, I was not saying that you should never shoot manual or that shooting manual is bad or that you should only shoot in aperture priority. It's not what I was saying at all. In fact, I do feel like you should know how to shoot in manual. When it comes to photography, you should know how to do the same thing multiple ways. So if one way doesn't work for some reason, you can immediately switch to a different way and keep things moving. So there is a time and place to shoot in manual. Certainly if you like to shoot in manual, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I really was trying to get across was that shooting in aperture priority really simplifies things, and it allows you to focus on your subject and capturing moments and not worrying about constantly changing settings. Another thing that was mentioned, a few people had questioned, how do I use aperture priority when shooting flash? There were a couple of people that said you can't use aperture priority when shooting flash. And that's what this video today is about. I want to show you that you absolutely can still use aperture priority when shooting flash. As a matter of fact, anytime I'm on location like this and I'm shooting flash, I still shoot in aperture priority. Because when I'm outside, the conditions change. If the sun is going in and out of the clouds, the lighting conditions are going to change. Every time I switch locations, depending upon where I'm pointing my camera, the conditions are going to change. And so instead of me having to worry about constantly adjusting that manually myself, I just keep it on aperture priority and I use exposure compensation to get it to taste. So when you're shooting on location with flash, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to get your ambient exposure first, and then you're going to bring your flash into it. Now, whether you shoot on manual or whether you're shooting aperture priority, that remains the same. You want to get your ambient exposure first, and then you go from there. So let's start with that, okay? So right now, as you can see, I have it on aperture priority. I'm gonna go 2.8 to keep it consistent. So right now, it thinks the right exposure is ISO 100, shutter speed of 1250 at 2.8. I don't like to shoot in high-speed sync, so 1250 isn't gonna work. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use an ND filter, which is exactly what I would do if I was on location, to be able to get that exposure the way that I want it to be. So if I put the ND filter on there, and we see, so now we're at 1/60th of a second, ISO 500, and that background is, say that's too much for what I want. So I'm going to turn this exposure dial. Let's go aggressive. Let's go 2 stops. So right now I'm at 1/60th of a second, which is within my flash sync speed, and I'm at ISO 125 at f2.8. Now, when I go ahead and turn on the trigger, of course, with most, well, I can't say with most cameras, but with Canon cameras, when the trigger is on, you lose your exposure simulation. So you're not gonna be able to see that, because when the trigger is on, it just wants to expose it so that the camera can focus. I'm using the old 6D Classic, so this isn't the mirrorless cameras, although I think they function the same way as well. So you won't be able to see that, but I'm gonna walk you through it, okay? So again, same way, if I put that back up, now we're getting, so it's not gonna let the camera go above 1/80th of a second, because that's the flash sync speed for this. So if I take that shot, and we look at that flash, oh, it's on 1:1, so that flash is gonna be way too hot. So let's bring that flash way down. Let's go 1/16th and take that shot. So that's pretty decent right there. That's pretty good. I typically wouldn't shoot with the ambient that dark, but I'm just trying to show the point. So being an aperture priority, I am still able to do the exact same thing that you do in manual. And now all I had to do was just turn the dial 2 stops to bring that down. Now, if I were to change things, so right now, the background is more lit. I'm underneath this tree, so that way I'm not in the sun. So let's say either I'm moving to a different location or the sun goes behind the cloud and the exposure changes and it gets darker. If I go back to regular exposure, it's saying 1600th on the shutter, ISO 100. So I'm just gonna point it to the ground, okay? So boom, and point it to the ground, just like that, it changes it from 1600th to 400, kept the ISO at 100, obviously the aperture is going to stay the same. Now, all I would then have to do is take the shot, because as long as the flash stays equal distance from my subject, I don't have to worry about that. But even if I did, I could just easily change that. So even when you're shooting flash, you can still do aperture priority. Now, again, when you think about it, all the camera is doing is what I would do anyway. If I was shooting in manual and I went from having a bright background to being a darker background, I would just adjust things. I would either adjust the shutter speed, or I would adjust the ISO, or if necessary, I would adjust the aperture. All things that I can do while I'm shooting in aperture priority. And it isn't any more work. It isn't a hassle. I'm not fighting the camera. The camera's not trying to do something that I don't want it to do. It's just as simple. In fact, it's faster for me to use aperture priority than it is manual.